Okay. Hi, and welcome to our presentation today. We're really excited to be talking about complex choice, decision-making with individuals exiting the sex industry or sexually exploitive situations. I'm Mary Farron, and I'm the director of the program.
And I'm Amnesty Cornelius. I coordinate the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth, and I'm very grateful to be able to discuss this timely and relevant topic today. So we'd like to get started with a land acknowledgement. I would ask that you all reflect on the piece of land you're currently located on. No matter where in the world we are today, we're located on Indigenous land. Mary and I are located on Turtle Island, and more specifically on the stolen lands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We'd also like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of Labrador, the Inuit and Inuit. As there's no reconciliation without action, we would like to take the action of passing on this resource, nativeland.ca. This is a living project that folks can contribute to worldwide. It shows you which nation's land you're on, the treaties that apply, and the languages used. This can be updated if you have that knowledge, but we would encourage you to use this resource to learn and share about the Indigenous peoples near you.
So to get started, we thought we'd talk about the work that we do here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Thrive is the main organization in which a number of our programs fall under. And what we have is the Community Support and Development Program, which consists of our newsletter, which goes out weekly, and our directory of provincial services that is updated yearly and is very comprehensive. PD training that's offered in the community, which includes Casey training and trauma-informed training. We also have our education program that serves individuals between the ages of 16 and 29 struggling to stay in school or those who have dropped out. And we offer the Springboard GED and the Youth at Promise program as well. Street Reach is a grassroots outreach program for 16 years and up. And this is guided by the principles of harm reduction and include case management for housing, community navigation. We have outreach walks, meals, outerwear, footwear, personal care items, phone access, and SWAP, Safe Work Access Program, which is for needle distribution and safe supplies, as well as naloxone kits and the training for the naloxone. The program supports a lot of individuals who are engaged in the sex industry, but are not necessarily able or interested in exiting at this time. We also have the Women's Fund, which is a special fund that's been set up during this pandemic to support women with the impacts of COVID-19, including issues related to domestic violence, housing, and access to technology. And then the Blue Door program, which was started in 2017, and it was in response to the report, Nobody's Mandate and Everybody's Responsibility, Sexual Exploitation and the Sex Trade in Newfoundland and Labrador. This is a 5-year program that's started, like I said, in 2017 and offers intensive supports to individuals, mainly between the ages of 16 and 29, to exit sex trade activities or those who have been sexually exploited. And we're currently working in the province, with the province and the federal government to figure out how we can extend this program because it's been quite successful. We offer intensive individualized services that support individuals to address a lot of the barriers to the exiting process. So we strive to meet participants where they are and offer flexible services that are rooted in the principles of self-determination, respect, and harm reduction. We are currently have a caseload that we're managing of 21 individuals, and we have approximately 20 to 21 people on our wait list. We have currently we have 3 full-time support coordinators or case managers that focus on addressing issues like social isolation, complex trauma, mental health, addictions, education, employment, housing, and any other of the issues that individuals may identify. We have an educator and employment support person, and this role has been expanded to include participants on the wait list. And she reaches out once a month to offer limited support, but we'll connect them to other services in our community. We also have a part-time counselor who has extensive experience working with mental health and addiction issues. And she offers flexible services that have no penalties for missed appointments and looks for ways for meeting individuals wherever they are and whatever their needs are. So she meets them online, she will meet them at her office, or she can come into our space. Well, and all of the team works in partnership with other service providers in the community and within Thrive. And we're really looking to strengthen the network to support our participants. The participants can stay in the program for as long as they're interested. And once they identify that they would like to transition out of our program, we work with them and the Blue Door team to develop a transition plan designed to support participants in maintaining their progress and continue to move towards their long-term life goals. The program works from a perspective of best practices and looks to new research in this area, and also recognizes the importance of lived experience and hearing from those voices as we work towards running successful programs. The Blue Door program works really closely with Casey, which is the Coalition Against the Sexual Exploitation of Youth, which Amnesty will discuss.
Thank you. So the coalition was established in 2006 and is comprised of community members, concerned stakeholders, and the voices of lived experience. Our work is rooted in the voice of lived experience, and we work to raise awareness, provide training and prevention, and support survivor leadership. We support survivor leadership through our Empowering Voices of Lived Experience, or EVOLVE program, where people can engage through co-chairing the coalition, co-facilitating training, and just generally guiding the direction of the work the coalition takes on, all while being compensated. Additionally, we support folks Additionally, we've also recently partnered with the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking to create a community of practice with national scope that's addressing all forms of exploitation and human trafficking, inclusive of organ and tissue, labor, and sexual exploitation. So the goal of this community is to create a broader impact nationally on this issue. Finally, we recently launched Notified, a free online training about the online sexual exploitation of youth. This is self-paced and available on our website.
So when we think about language and our meetings, we know that the language around the sex industry, sex trade, has been very controversial over the years, and this is the language we're going to use. It's the language we use here at Thrive, and we are really open. If you have any concerns about how we're using the language, we're open to hearing what you have to say about that. We are always open to learning how things are changing. We recognize that it is changing. So if you have any things you'd like to discuss at the end of this presentation, we'd like to hear from you. And we also will have our emails at the end. So if you just want to email us, you can also do that. And when we use the word sex industry, we use a term to cover the continuum of sex work, from sex work to sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and to survival sex. The term sex work is not inclusive of that experience, and particularly for individuals who've been exploited, and could imply choice. We have found that the word sex industry encourages a dialogue about people's experiences, and we allow individuals and make space for individuals to define their experiences however they wish. When we talk about human trafficking, we talk about the recruitment, harboring, transportation, or obtaining of an individual under force, fraud, or coercion to perform commercial sex acts. It does not have to involve travel, transportation, or movement across borders, and this is often a common misconception about human trafficking. Sexual exploitation is the sexual abuse of children and youth through the exchange of sexual acts for drugs, food, shelter, protection, or other basic life needs or money. Sexual exploitation includes and involves children and youth creating sexual abuse videos or images, often referred to as child pornography. Sexual explicit websites, stripping, erotic, massage, phone sex, selling sex. Prostitution is the language that's actually used in the Canadian law right now, but we don't like that language, particularly when we're thinking about sexual exploitation. We think about, it could also involve escort services. And the Criminal Code of Canada defines sexual exploitation of youth as less than 18 years of age. And we are mindful that in this presentation that folks can be over the age of 18 and still have experienced exploitation. And when we think about decision-making and choice, we recognize the complexity of decision-making and choice, and we'll discuss that throughout our presentation today.
So now that we're all on the same page about language, we wanted to highlight a few of our key values and how we approach the work. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does give sort of the overview key thoughts. So being non-judgmental is directly tied to being trauma-informed. To fully embody this value, we examine our taught and unconscious bias, whether they be learned through personal experience, societal expectation, or any other way. We have to unlearn them and then relearn a better or different way. For us, being non-judgmental goes beyond the sex industry and related experiences and is instead built on that foundation of trauma-informed work. So trauma-informed work often asks, what has happened before this moment to inform the behaviors and worldview now? When we look at experiences of sexual exploitation, we often see linked experiences of poverty, survival, neglect and abuse, substance use, intergenerational or personal trauma, and other underlying systemic issues. We then have to ask, how do these experiences change the brain? We know trauma cascades into coping mechanisms, worldview, self-esteem, self-talk, survival, and interpersonal interactions, and many other ways of being in the world. When we understand this and allow it to inform our worldview, as service providers and peer supporters, we strip away judgment because it challenges the narrative told by the general public and instead looks to science and experience to inform our understanding. This also means we need to be adaptive and creative in our programming. This ensures when we're adaptive and creative, we ensure that the needs of the participants are met. Individual people and experiences require individual supports and connections. This includes supporting people when they say, this won't work for me, or I'm not willing to try that. The key here is that we, as a service provider, are the people with the privilege and the power, and we need to be the ones to ask, what will work and how can I help you make that happen? This often includes working outside of the box or systems that are one size fits all. Harm reduction is fundamental to our work. Within harm reduction, we hold space for people to make decisions or choices we might not agree with or think is against their best interest. If such a decision is made, we use the values discussed above to find ways to be supportive. This may look like providing safer drug use equipment or safer sex supplies. It may also look like having a safety plan for a person living with a violent partner. No matter the situation, the main goal is to ensure as much safety as possible for the individual we're working with. For example, if someone is leaving the sex industry, but they need to return because they're problem solving and they're just not sure how to have their needs met in any other way, and they don't feel that, service can provide that or support that, however that looks, then we don't need to tell them that their safety could be at risk. We already know that. What we need to do instead is work with them to create a safety plan that they contribute to, agree to, and feel safe and comfortable using. And so with that, we can help them gain access to information that they want, give them safer sex supplies if they're looking for those, and just create a sense of community. And very importantly, we want them to feel safe returning to the program, regardless of if they've been active in the sex industry or not, because they know that this is a safer space where they won't be met with judgment. Collaboration and quality are necessary when working with folks whose needs are complex and often go unmet. Folks who are exploited are often targeted because tangible and intangible needs are going unmet in their life. No one organization can provide everything. So we need to assess the scopes and limitations of our organizations and programs, and then identify key partners to collaborate with to create a network to support that individual. When we do this, we create more resilience and a network that people can rely on, which ultimately benefits the participant. Finally, we need to be accountable and transparent in everything that we do. This helps to establish respectful and trusting relationships. Transparency helps us establish trust because when we are having honest conversations about what we can and cannot do, we boundary set, and that makes us accountable to ourselves and to the participant. With follow through and commitment to doing what we said we would do each and every time, or letting people know when we can't, if there's like a snowstorm or something else comes up where you're just not going to be able to make that commitment. When you let someone know, you're transparent. Over time, that consistent and communicative behavior fosters trust and respect and really allows us to move forward with participants.
Thanks. That was a lot. Moving along to power and putting this slide together. it created a lot of discussion between Amnesty and I, and because often the topic of discussion in supervision for both staff and for staff when we're talking about micro and macro. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to talk about it in terms of the work we are doing here at Thrive, and in particular the Blue Door program, because it is too big for us. But by definition, trafficking and sexual exploitation are to have power over someone, and the patterns of the trafficker or exploiters are to create a sense of perceived power for the individuals that they are exploiting. The grooming process, in effect, is giving a sense of power through a postured sense of belonging and love, and folks we often work with have felt powerlessness. As a community support, we need to recognize how much power we have in our role, thinking about how we have access to the resources and the fact that we often face less barriers when we're navigating systems, and we have the power to decide whether participants, what the participants' support will look like. And we talk about that a lot, of ensuring that we recognize that power when we're making these decisions and trying to think about in the best interest of the individuals we're serving. And this is why it's so important to focus on what individuals want and not what we think is best. And we have to allow lots of space and time for folks to feel a sense of agency in their lives. In the Blue Door program, we try to empower the folks we work with by highlighting their individual and personal power in ways what can often appear to be situations where they have no power. We encourage and support them to reach out in ways that they need. And at times, we recognize that folks may need to navigate systems for themselves, or we may need to support them in navigating them, depending on what their needs are, and making that fine balance there of not taking over. And we have had individuals, for a good example is we had an individual who was dating someone who had a history of violent behaviors towards women, and his parole officer and the police reached out to us to let her know that she was at risk. She wanted to stay in the relationship, so we worked with her to create a safety plan without judgment. And this was why supervision is so critical. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. But she installed the 360 Aware app, but her partner removed it. And so we encouraged her to also put a police hazard on her house, which she did. And one night he became quite violent, and she was able to call 911, and the police showed up within minutes. And she talked later about how that gave her the sense of power. She called and they actually responded to her very quickly, and her life was, she really felt that her life was quite a bit of danger on that night, so felt supported by that. And this gave her a sense of power. So we really tried to build on that, her sense of power, and still allowing space for what we know about the cycles of violence for women and those who've been exploited. So my role as the director is to allow space for staff to process what comes up for them, such as feelings that they're supporting folks to stay in violent relationships, or dealing with feelings of judgment that they may have towards the participant. And I'd be happy to share the supervision guidelines that we use here at Thrive, because there are a lot of issues that can come up when you're creating space for people to have that independence to make decisions that we don't always support. And how do we process those feelings when they do come up? And as Amnesty mentioned before, we work with folks to find other connections in the community, but also recognize that some relationships are not a good fit, and we have to support that choice of individuals to engage with services or not. For example, individuals in our program may choose to work with agencies whose values do not align with Thrive's, but we work as best we can in collaboration to support the individual in the program. Thrive also strives to work in less silos and more collaboratively, as we would like folks to have more choice in making decisions about the services that support them. And Amnesty will talk more about that now.
Thank you. So the difference between choice and decision is nuanced and often really challenging because the terms are used interchangeably or mistaken for each other. So our experiences from gestation onward influence how we see and interpret the world, and thus how we make decisions and choices. If, for example, a person born to a highly anxious parent who experienced anxiety in the womb will have higher levels of stress and anxiety throughout their life. They will have heightened amygdala activity and cortisol activity, meaning their threshold for stress is reduced. Over time, they will also have a harder time turning off their HPA axis or stress response. That anxious worldview informs and directs the decision-making process and enacting choice, which keeps the brain in survival mode. We see a similar pattern of brain response in people who have experienced trauma. Decision-making is a process. It often includes weighing the options, possibilities, and outcomes, such as making a pros and cons list. Decisions are often made due to circumstance and are based in fact, not morality, power, or ability. Additionally, decision-making is influenced by the systems we participate in, such as capitalism. Importantly, decisions can be made in the absence of choice. In our work, this might look like a person deciding to recruit others into sexually exploitive situations to avoid violence or forced sex, which profits the exploiter. Due to a lack of personal agency experienced in exploitive situations, this is not a choice. Additionally, there are not reasonable options presented to the decision maker. Finally, the only choice this person can make is to survive. That entirely changes how our brain functions and how we see the world. This exemplifies that decision can be made in the absence of choice. Choice, on the other hand, is the ability to select between reasonable options, and importantly, those options need to be reasonable to the choice or decision maker, and then they can enact that choice. Choice may not be based in fact, but rather based in ability, morality, power, including personal power or perceived power. While choice may be influenced by the decision-making process, it takes the additional step of action. If we return to our example above, someone was given two options, or sex or recruitment, but now they're also connected to an organization. Due to that agency connection, the options that can be identified by the individual shift, and they can now be stay in the current situation but be a little bit safer, leave the current situation, no change, but still connected with an agency, feeling that out. And so via that connection with the organization, they may experience more perceived or actual power. This means they might have more of their needs met outside of an exploitive situation, or that they just have more of a social connection, things like that. All of these factors support an individual to enact choice. Exiting is a process, which means that someone will make this choice repeatedly and on an ongoing basis. The shift from decision to choice changed the options and made them all reasonable to the choice maker. So I'll now pass it over to Mary.
And we're talking about some of the barriers, the impacts and choices and reflections from our work. So we are reminded that many of the barriers that we are navigating can't even be identified, as they are part of systems that are constructed around colonialism and capitalist values and ideas. So recognizing this is a very important starting point for why folks can be exploited or trafficked. Again, this is a bigger discussion for its own discussion. So I'm going to really reflect on just particularly from our work. So many of the individuals we have worked with don't even see their experiences as exploitation. And so we try to create space for folks to see the barriers these experiences have had for them. One example is a woman came into Thrive when she was part of a dance club, when the dance clubs closed during the beginning of the pandemic. She'd seen our poster and heard about our program, and she was not really sure why she wanted to reach out, but she just wanted to find out more about our program. So, and two women came in that day. Both said they didn't have any food or cash or personal care items, etc. And they were both nervous and didn't want to give their names and were worried about the guy who owned the club, which also owned their housing, and where they lived. So they weren't really sure if they were thinking about leaving the life. And one of the women said she didn't want to move to online or street level work, which was the options for her presented to her by her boss. And so she was facing many barriers to make that change. So we supported her in finding housing. We gave her gas money, phone minutes, all things she identified as barriers for her. And we tried to reduce some of the barriers and make space for her to explore what she wanted. We paid some licensing fees for a professional association, and she got a job where she needed a uniform, and we supported her in purchasing the uniforms. And in less than a year, she's found a full-time permanent position where she's really enjoying her work and starting to think about post-secondary, going back to post-secondary to expand on how she can move through this career and up through this career that she's chosen. Of course, she continues to still struggle with addiction, so she's been working really closely with our counselor and managing her mental health. And she's able to talk about things that she misses in the life, such as finding, with ways to connect with the people. She was really connected with the women she worked with, so creating circles outside of that. And so we're validating some of the things that she's missing about that life, like such as getting her hair done and her nails done every week. And we're exploring ways she can do this on her terms and within her new budget. So another example is a young person that she was 16. She was in our education program. She was moving through our education program. And she talked about her experience with her boyfriend. And she was able to identify that she was being exploited by her partner. And of course, we could see this, but she needed to come to this on her own. So we shifted, at that point, we talked to her about the Blue Door program. She was very interested, and she shifted into our program and was able to complete her GED. She tried out a number of employment programs, including student jobs and one with the federal government. And she applied for this on her own and talked about how difficult it was to get through that process, but she did it and she got the job. And now she's started her post-secondary program that she really wanted to do. She's feeling very confident about that, but she is also still struggling with addictions and her sense of self outside of the experience of being exploited and feeling sexualized within our society. But she's working on that, and she reaches out for ways to manage that in safer ways, which we support her in. She's also working with our counselor and coming to our addictions program, our addictions group. And we need to recognize that this can be a long process for individuals and not have timelines. This is a one-year program. You start and then you finish at the end of the year. We really see it as a continuum. We've had people who've been in our program for a year and then transitioned into a different access of support, and others who've started since the beginning and continue in our program. And we need to create space for folks to make meaning of their choices and give space for lots of perspectives, including identifying exploitation and barriers while still holding space for those who identify as sex work is a choice.
So when we examine what allows people to make informed choices for the gold standard, we see that it's really more complex than most people realize. So I like to think of it as an iceberg, which you can see on your screen. So circumstances such as access to education, inherited wealth or lack thereof, personal or intergenerational trauma, racism, or white privilege are all factors that influence how we make choices. Intersecting identities, which are often directly linked with individual or group experiences of oppression or privilege, change one's experience of personal agency and the ability to reflect on how those factors weigh into enacting choice. Additionally, political and social systems, such as the legal system, change how we access the world and therefore how we engage with it through choice. For example, a person racialized as non-white who identifies as trans and is engaged in the sex industry through exploitation may not report their experiences to police or other agencies, because often those organizations are built on the foundations of colonialism and white supremacy. Additionally, they often subscribe to cis heteronormativity and often a moral belief that sexual purity is required to be a moral member of society. These assumptions and moral judgments do not allow people to make meaning of their experience and hinder choice. In these cases, only decisions can be made because oppressive power subverts personal power, creating a holding cell via survival mode. To support choice, we need to dismantle oppressive power. Choices become available as one processes their trauma, gains access to financial resources, builds self-esteem, gains access to control and autonomy, and knowledge, which is inclusive of formal, informal, and cultural knowledge. All of these factors enhance the ability to see broader perspectives, which create or shift the options and allow more choice.
Thanks, Amnesty. And on to another big topic, morality in the work. So moral, stigma, society, and power, these are all topics we could go on about, as we've talked a little bit about here. But we need to recognize how our personal and moral compass can impact the work we do. And of course, looking at how stigma in society makes it difficult for folks to talk about their experiences in the sex industry, as Amnesty just talked about. Again, coming back to supervision, which is a crucial part of the work, so staff can explore how these ideas interact with the work that they're doing. We try to create space for participants to talk openly about their experiences with others who have similar experiences. And we had the opportunity to bring folks with lived experience around the table without staff and made an award-winning radio documentary with CBC. There was a very candid conversation that continued after the recording when staff and women came together to have their lunch. When debriefing with staff afterwards, we talked about how there was a power shift in the room, and we're able to identify the importance of peer support. We recognized it, but that really validated that sense that we need to create more space for peer support to take place. So we asked the question, how do moral, stigma, and power interact with the decision-making process? At Thrive, we work to make space for people to talk about decisions without judgment and support them in whatever they decide. What we have noticed is part of the exiting process is stepping in and out of the industry and engaging in substance use and having partners who are violent. And we need to be able to hold space for those people to make those decisions. And how these things interact with choice, again, reducing barriers so that folks have more options, but allow space for the experience of choice plus action equals consequences, which can have positive or negative outcomes. As humans, we understand the world through experience, and how our brains develop coping skills is based on our survival. We want folks to learn to trust us and know whatever they are thinking and feeling, they can share that with us or not. Again, we recognize unconscious bias and thinking about the importance of recognizing our own personal privilege and power within systems and how that is fundamentally biased about things we've talked about in the past. It's important to build space for folks with lived experience to move into leadership roles. This includes training so that we can bring science and their lived experience together. We also need to know that we don't know what folks bring to the table when we do this work. And I think that's really important. We should not expect that folks will share their experiences. Since starting this work, I'm surprised at how many folks have lived experience or engaged in the sex industry, including those in my family or friends in my friend circle. Moving away from making assumptions on both sides about those who identified with lived experiences and those who don't is really important.
So all of this kind of comes to the conclusion of how can we disrupt demand? And so when we support people in creating reasonable options, we ensure their needs are met. This can include housing, food, transportation, a sense of belonging, overall care, support, and wellness, etc. So when we provide all of these things and support those needs being met, we can create the option of exiting, or if a person is an adult, they may create the option of doing by-choice sex work where they keep the full profit for themselves. Whatever path someone chooses, supporting informed choices made with a broad perspective and understanding will increase their personal power and their ability to enact choice. These informed choices could be small at first, such as getting a new phone number to create space between someone who's looking to exit the life and the reminders of it, or they could be very large, such as moving cities or provinces with the goal of starting fresh and removing social, personal, and environmental cues related to life. When we shift from decision maker to choice maker, we disrupt demand, and this happens in a few ways. First, we present reasonable options that increase safety, such as exiting, making a safety plan, or supporting someone in knowing and enforcing their rights. This process increases personal power, including perceived power, which means we support increasing the agency of the individual so that they have the right to say no, set boundaries, and exit the life they so choose. Second, we support folks in processing their experiences of exploitation, trauma, and abuse, all while ensuring their needs are met. This allows them to identify and repurpose the strength needed to survive. This disrupts demand through ensuring someone does not need to return to the life to have their basic needs met, while also creating space for people to gain access to education, resources, or start a new path entirely. Importantly, if someone does return to the life, that's a form of problem solving and should be met without judgment. Using a trauma-informed lens asks what leads the exploiter to exploit. And often the answer to this question is the same answer to what made a person vulnerable to exploitation. Experiences of poverty, abuse, needs going unmet, unstable living environments, and social expectations are all reflected in the life stories of exploiters. To truly disrupt demand, we need to prioritize trauma-informed, holistic community healing that engages everyone.
So thank you for listening to our presentation. If you have any questions, for sure there's lots of discussion that can come out of this. You can reach out to either Amnesty or I. We've posted our emails on there, so please feel free. And we are going to be having a discussion now, so you can pop your questions in the question place there. So thanks for attending, and we look forward to answering any questions we can.
Thank you.